So, we're doing this because, we read three of the tales, the Millers, the Wife of Baths, and the Partners. We didn't get around to the Partners last time, so, we can just focus on that. As a general background, Pardoner in the Middle Ages was essentially a guy that was licensed by the church to sell pardons. And pardons basically being, you would basically buy forgiveness, for what you did or buy forgiveness for someone else. So, as you probably remember, this was a big deal. It was a highly kind of corrupt practice. It was one of the things that led to the Protestant Reformation. So the partner is one of the people that's coming along with the rest of the pilgrims on this pilgrimage to Canterbury. He comes right after a really kind of sad, tragic tale. The host, begins by saying, tell us a happier tale. And then, some of the other pilgrims say, tell us a moral tale. And the partner responds by saying he'll say an honest tale. And he says, I need a drink first. Honest, it meant something more like noble at the time, but it's a curious word. The partner starts with a long prologue, basically openly boasts about his fraud as a partner. My translation would be, for my intent is but only to win and nothing for the correction of sin. And he's basically saying that he is skimming money from his pardon trade. I assume he's making some sort of commission. He seems to be operating under the knowledge and authority of the church. Is another thing. I mean, my sense is that this isn't so much a corrupt practice on his part as something that's more or less perhaps tacitly condoned by the church. Or at least that's the implication, I think. He also talks about making trade and selling fraudulent relics, supposedly bones of saints and whatnot, that are supposed to have magical healing qualities. Recall that at the beginning of the poem, in the general prologue, when Chaucer was talking about the motivation people had to go on pilgrimage, it was being thankful for supposedly saints helping to heal the pilgrims. There's a continued kind of idea here that people treat religion as a sort of magic. So in any event, the partner admits to loving this kind of debauched lifestyle that he can live by basically defrauding people by trading on religion. He proudly says that he desires fine things. He doesn't care if the money is stolen from starving widows who, have to starve their kids in order to give the partner money. So in any event, the tale begins. It begins with a sort of brief sermon on three critical vices. What he says is that his main theme is that greed is the root of all evil. And as he begins his tale, he goes into a couple variations on that theme, like gluttony. He talks about gambling. He talks about, and false oaths, lies, I take it. And, basically saying like, God damn it, stuff like that, in the way that we do every day and the way that kind of destroys the meaning of the words. Now he's speaking, remember, he's basically, his tale, his shtick here is to basically give a demonstration of what he would do for the people that he would be defrauding. Like, he's basically putting on his fraudulent show for entertainment here, rather than to actually defraud people, I guess, right? So in any event, he goes through these, he kind of talks about these variations on this theme of greed being the root of all evil. He finally gets to his actual story. The actual story, the tale is set in Flanders, which was one of the most one of the richest and commercially advanced countries in Europe. It opens with three kind of riotous men in a tavern who are drinking, gambling, whoring, making blasphemous oaths. The rioters hear a bell from a burial. They're told that the person who died was a friend of theirs who was killed by a thief named Death, who has killed many others. And taking this personification literally, the three men make an oath, to act as one to kill Death, which is like a weird kind of echoing of the Holy Trinity, the whole 3-in-1 thing. So, stepping out, the three men come along, they hear that Death basically wiped out an entire village, and they figure, well, we'll just go to the village to find Death. So they're on their way. They come across this kind of piteous, infinitely old man who claims that by God's will, he cannot die no matter how hard he tries, until he finds, and the old man says that the only way to kind of solve his problem of being this infinitely old guy is to find a young man who would exchange his youth for his old age, which again is like a weird echoing, I think, of Christ. Like this would be this worldly Christ. The old man desires nothing more than death. He just seems to kind of keep on living and kind of infinitely decaying over time, which is like weirdly echoes the fate of the universe, the way it'll just kind of go on forever with everything progressively deteriorating. Obviously, Chaucer didn't know that that's how the universe would end up, but it certainly seems to echo that looking back at the story from 2020. The old man has this wonderful moment when he basically says, nor death, alas, will take away my life. Thus I walk on, and this is my translation, nor death, alas, will take away my life. Thus I walk on through restless, wretched strife. And on the ground, which is my mother's gate, I knock with my staff both early and late and say, please, mother, let me in. Lo, how I vanish, flesh, blood, and skin. That's my attempt at a dramatic reading there. I apologize.
Well done, well done.
The three riders mock and accost him. They demand information about where to find Death. And the old man, offended, points them up a crooked path towards a tree, saying Death can be found there. So the three riders, they go up the crooked path up to the tree, and under the tree they find a massive treasure of Florentine gold coins. They agree initially they agree to split it up equally, but they realize if they brought it back to town, they would be seen as thieves and hung, so they resolve to wait until night to bring the treasure back home. To hold them over until the night, they decide to have one of them go back to town to go buy some bread and wine. Now this is, again, an obvious echoing of the Eucharist, right? The Catholic ritual of having the wafers and the wine, which were symbolic of Christ's blood and taken at the time to be somehow literally the substance of Christ's body and blood. So they draw straws to see who will go to town. Now remember, the way that they, in the general prologue, the way that people initially decided the order to tell the tales was drawing straws. Again, there's a weird kind of echoing of something else in the general prologue. The youngest of the three riders draws the shortest, so he heads off into town. As soon as he is gone, the remaining two resolve to kill him when he comes back, so that they can just split up the treasure between the two of them. Unbeknownst to them, the youngest, while the youngest one is in town, though, he has a similar idea of, why don't I just kill the two of them so I can have the treasure all to myself? So he goes and buys poison while he is in town, and he puts the deadly poison into 2 bottles of wine that he will give to his compatriots. When the youngest returns to the treasure, the other 2 stab him with his body lying dead on the ground. One of the remaining 2 grabs a bottle. By chance, it was a poisoned one, drinks in celebration, and hands it to his accomplice, who drinks as well, and they both immediately die. Wrapping up the tale, the partner has a weird moment of sermonizing. It's been taken different ways over the years. Sometimes people think that it's the mask kind of slipping, that he has an honest religious impulse that he lets out at this point. I think I'm in the minority of thinking that what the partner says here is ironic, but, mocking. But in any event, here's what it is. It's my own translation. Alas, mankind, how can it ever be that to your creator, who your flesh wrought, and with his precious heart blood, your soul bought, you are false and unnatural, alas. So it's like, okay, you're supposed to, basic Christian idea is that, oh, Jesus did this great thing for you by dying on the cross, right? Like, why are you so awful that you can't kind of repay what he did for you, and be a good person?
Wait, that's the host speaking? That is
the partner speaking. That is the partner speaking. All right. It's him sermonizing. I mean, remember, he's basically acting out his shtick, that he would do for the rubes that he's defrauding as a show for the rest of the pilgrims. Right. And I assume that's how he would kind of wrap things up. And it's an interesting choice of words. He says, basically the word is modern English. It's a natural. But the exact word he uses is unkind. What that meant, kind, we think of it as meaning nice now, but, also think of it means type, right? Like, it's basically, why are you so, it's like you're going against your nature, right? But there's an implication there that, okay, maybe what human nature isn't really what Christianity and Catholicism take it to be. Maybe it's not a good thing. In any event, the partner goes on needling his fellow pilgrims to buy relics. It's kind of this ridiculous display. It's like he starts he's just told everyone that, I do this ridiculous fraudulent show, and now I'm going to try to sell you my fraudulent relics because you're all a bunch of fucking sinners, basically, is what he's implying. He particularly focuses on Harry Bailey, the tavern keeper, the host, who first suggested having a storytelling contest. He's the closest thing to a sort of governor or mayor of this little pilgrim town that they picked to run the storytelling contest. And harangued by the partner, Harry Bailey finally snaps, and with what I think is utter seriousness, he's really enraged by the partner at this point. He threatens to cut off the partner's balls and feed them to a pig so that the partner's balls would be enshrined in a hog's turd.
Okay.
Yeah. So, as a background, the partner is kind of depicted as a sort of unmanly, kind of quasi hermaphroditic figure. He's obviously not equipped to deal with actual violence. This threat kind of finally shuts him up. I think must feel an element of, I don't know. But in any event, what happens, this partner, the quote is, this partner answered with not a word, so wrathful he was, not a word would he say. However, at that point, another pilgrim, the knight, steps forward and kind of asks them to make up, which they reluctantly do, and they give each other a kind of ceremonial kiss of peace. The end.
Yeah, we got to discuss that kiss of peace. Because at the end, on the translation, I guess that you had given me earlier, or given us earlier, it says, "Come, partner, draw nearer, my dear sir. Let's laugh again and keep the ball in play. keep the ball in play. They kissed and we continued on our way. I mean, the last thing you think you're going to hear in this particular tale is that they kissed.
Yeah.
And so, what's going on here? I mean, I've read some secondary literature that proposes certain ideas that have to do with his sexuality in this. And I'm like, well, why is this coming up? So I'm asking you, what do you think about that?
On the kiss thing, I think there was a sort of ceremonial kind of kiss a peace that people would give each other when they would kind of stop fighting, right? But it is interesting that a kiss, I think in whatever, even if he tried to explain away the kiss by saying that, oh, it was a ceremony, that's what people did at the time, it is a little bit personal,
Well, the translation I have here, the way it reads.
Yeah, it's a fair translation. I mean, all the literal text says is,
I beg of you to kiss the partner.
Yeah, and partner, I pray thee, draw thee near, and as we did, let us laugh and play. Soon they kissed and rode forth on their way.
Right. I mean, to me, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, and I want to know what everybody thinks, but it just jumped out in my face. What? And also some of the secondary literature talks about that in terms of the sexuality of the partner. And I'm like, whoa, did I miss something in this?
Yeah, a fair amount of I think a lot of people want to make a big deal about the fact that he's a sort of, hermaphroditic figure. I think somewhere in the general prologue, he's described as being like,
he's a gelding.
Mare. Yeah, gelding, right.
Is he a gelding or a mare? And so the point that I got from that was that he was more alien than he was, it was just to sort of set him as other. And it was kind of the point of having him described in that way.
Yeah, I imagine him a lot like David Bowie for some reason.
Oh, that's funny. Well, he's physically supposed to be kind of like grotesque in the same way that the wife of Bath was, in the sense that he's vastly different, or he's vastly different than sort of like the others, I guess. But the idea at the kiss at the end, I read also about that, and I thought, I didn't really think it was that weird, because who knows what people did during that time. But one way that it was presented was that, what Chaucer is doing in all of these stories is he's using someone else as a mouthpiece for himself, and he's presenting this really, sort of horrible side of things, this like disgusting, despicable part of mankind, but that he has to pull it back in the end. And so he has the knight, who is the most, like, the highest up in the social hierarchy, who was the first one to tell the story, to be the one to kind of like put the partner back in his place and kind of make everybody kiss and make up and kind of, wrap that whole scene up. Because I think they're telling, right, we discussed last time, they're telling the stories in order of social rank, in so to speak. Like, I think somewhat.
The idea at first.
It was the idea at first, and then it kind of moved out, but he's sort of the lowest on the totem pole. It was interesting to me. I wanted to ask you, because you said he had this authority from the church, and I don't know that part. I didn't know that part. And to me, it did not seem like he had an authority from the church, but if you're telling me he does, I certainly believe you. But I'm just thinking, what is what is the upside for the church on this? Because he's clearly, like, he's basically at the beginning of the story telling everyone, here is how I pull the wool over everyone. I'm going to let you in on this huge, like, con job that I do. It seems like he's telling them what he's doing.
Yeah. The reason I would say that the evidence for why he's authorized by the church is that he seems fairly honest in his prologue and tale, or I should say in his prologue. And he repeatedly says that he connects himself with Rome. He says, our liege lord seal on my patent. Basically meaning, like, literally, I have a seal from a bishop, that says on a patent, i.e. like a license, that says I can do this. He says that his at one point, I forget where, but that my pardons are fresh from Rome, basically. And he says that he went to Rome I think at some point he says he had gone to Rome recently. And the other thing about it is just, the other religious figures don't say anything along the lines of like, this guy is
Bullshit.
not actually authorized.
Yeah, but isn't that the whole point of Chaucer's anyway? Is he's condemning the church anyway? So why wouldn't he have a character like the partner?
Yeah, these things aren't in conflict,
and when
right?
when you say he's honest, I don't know. I feel like he's the opposite of honest. I feel like he's telling us in the beginning, here is how I am so good at deceiving everyone. Like, this is how I am so good at this. Is that not right?
Well, but I don't see how these things are contradictory, though. I mean, you can, tell people how, that you can brag about how you conned somebody or how you do it, and, this is not this isn't a good look for the church, but that's the point. So it's not contradictory there either. He's just actually going into what he does, and we can have our judgments about it, but I don't think I see that these things are necessarily conflicting, though.
Right. If someone goes into big explanation of how he's so good at lying, if that explanation of how he's lying is accurate, then he would presumably be truthful, right, to begin with. And also, it's very much an admission against interest, one would think. I think it's very interesting that he goes into this whole, explanation of how he goes about his business, because, obviously it's kind of an admission against interest. And what I do wonder is what's motivating him to tell this story as his, noble or quote honest story. Is it a boast? Is it, in some way, does he have, my sense of him is that possibly he actually began as a serious, honest to God Christian, but as time went on, he sort of became corrupted, and perhaps he has a fragment or a shred of his old self that kind of wants to, that I don't know, almost wants to expose himself or something, to other people, what a horrible person he is. But in any event, it's such a strange choice that he makes to kind of go on this whole spiel.
Well, one interesting piece of secondary literature, they were talking about how this particular tale was something that would serve as like the sort of anti-Chaucer. And it was sort of asking the question, can you tell a tale, or can you tell this moral story? Can you tell these things coming from this sort of bad person and still learn a lesson, like this sort of hollow person? So he's not a great person. He really is, to me, like I can't see it any other way, telling in the beginning that I have all of these eloquent preaching skills and I do it for the purpose of gaining wealth. Like I sell this stuff, and he's, pulling back the veil and showing how he does it. And then yet he tells this story that is quite convincing that, money is the root of all evil. And I don't know. I think it's just an interesting thing to think, like, what does Chaucer think about what the stories that he tells, and what is this tale really serve, like in the grand scheme of all his tales, right? He's telling us something. And what is he telling us in this one? And it seems like he's saying something about, whether or not a story can come from like an immoral person or not, and can it still have its effect, whether or not it comes from this not so great person.
Well, I personally think that this is reflecting the whole point, whole entire Chaucer's point. The church is fraudulent. So of course this guy's fraudulent. And then you're saying, well, then how are we supposed to, or are we supposed to listen to his tale or learn from his tale if he's admitting that he's fraudulent? To me, I go back to, okay, what's Chaucer saying? And maybe what he's saying is that everything that comes out of the church is fraudulent, and you follow it at your own peril.
Yeah. But the other thing, I kind of wonder, I think, as I said last time, I think it's there's a serious question as to how religious is Chaucer and what sort of religious flavor of religious is he, if he is religious. Mm-hmm. It's kind of just assumed by scholars that he's in the medieval times, so he must be Catholic. But I think I can't read this kind of thing without wondering, like, what the hell does he actually think about God? And I kind of wonder if the Partner's Tale kind of hints at what might be Chaucer's actual serious religious beliefs. The whole business about, I think it's pretty clear that he thinks that the Catholic Church is corrupt, that, the way that people treat religion, they basically treat it as sort of magic that they are using just for their own personal gain. It doesn't really seem very Christian. It just kind of seems like a continuation of paganism. But there's sort of like an idea of, so that, like, at one point the old man, basically what he shows in what he shows in the Partner's Tale is sort of like all the ways that Christianity can be kind of misunderstood, and what would it mean for Christianity not to be misunderstood? Like, the idea of the afterlife has to be something more than what the old man is kind of hoping for, which is more of like this worldly continuation of life. I think that the guy that the old man has to find who would exchange his youth for the old man's age is sort of a weird inversion of Christ. People think of Christ as giving more life, and that heaven will literally just be sort of like a continuation of life on earth. But I think, like Chaucer is saying, that can't possibly be right, that whatever the hell is meant by, heaven has to be something completely different. It's not, our ideas of religion is too this worldly. My suspicion is that to the extent Chaucer is religious, he might be a sort of negative theologian, that which is an idea current at the time, that if there's any religion, then it has to be radically kind of detached from heady concern. I think another kind of figure that maybe you might want to draw a comparison to is someone like Kierkegaard, if you wanted to take Chaucer as being actually religious. Just think about it. Like, this is almost like a Kierkegaardian sort of move, that you would have this utterly corrupt, you would have a sort of try to make a religious point by using a kind of utterly corrupt mouthpiece, basically. That the point would be to try to infer what the religious point would be through this, what appears to be completely sordid tale.
So what is that point, though? That's the thing. What is the point of so we have a dishonest guy, or if you want to call him, let's call him corrupt instead of dishonest. This corrupt guy telling a story, which is, a pretty valid moral story. Like, I don't think it's all that uncommon. It doesn't really feel unique. It's, basically money is the root of all evil. And here's how that plays out. And then you have the guy at the end who's just really, he says, are you interested in buying a relic or whatever he says to him? And the host is just so pissed. Like, he's like, no way, he's got a really obscene response to it. So what is the point of that? Like, why are we doing this? You know what I mean? Like, what is he trying to say about this whole, what is he trying to say about the religion and all of these things by having this corrupt person tell a pretty decent story and then have this other guy kind of reject his offer of a relic? What's the end game? Is that not like curious to any, like, I don't know. I
take your, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking, I don't know. It's probably different reading it during the time that he wrote it. But if I think about like the Wife of Bath and the Miller, not as much, but the Wife of Bath, it seemed like the whole point of that one was to really challenge some ideas about how women were perceived or what women could do. It seemed quite progressive, right? So this feels a little bit like that, but I'm not sure I'm grasping exactly how. In which way is he challenging this?
Is this one of those things where it's like a parody, like you like Archie Bunker because he's a racist or because he's shining a light on racism or something like that? It's like you could maybe take it one of two ways. Like if this guy's a caricature of maybe not even corruption. I mean, because I guess he does. I mean, does he say stuff like "pull the wool over the eyes"?
No,
Anyway,
he didn't. He doesn't say that.
I mean,
Well,
it could be like one of these like Wall Street bankers who are like just unashamed, who are like will tell you exactly how they made their money and the success without awareness, and so anybody listening could be like, dude, and he's like, yeah, I know, I just, we foreclosed on everybody and like I got, a huge bonus, and it won't be out of sorts for the person telling you that story. There won't be a contradiction because they don't hold another value, in order to be like in contradiction to. But, so I guess I don't know so much about the framing of these stories. And I think that a lot of these could go down into like the times they're written in, I don't know about like the ceremonial kiss, but Jennifer, like you said, yeah, who knows what goes on, like, and that makes sense. And, a lot of these things might ring maybe a little false or maybe just a little hollow because we've philosophically gotten to where this was trying to go to people too, which is maybe a break with, religious authority. I have a literal take on or not literal, well, I guess exactly literal. It depends on which definition we mean, but just the story and what went on in the story that he told. I think it's less like the wife of Bath tale in that the wife of Bath, we were getting her personal account, and this seems to be more of a fable or something. And not that doesn't take away from your point that there's similarities going on here, but that's just one way that they're different. And so this tale was a pretty good story. I mean, it's a really good story as far as, the point, like the first conspiracy was a third person, right? Or,
out as a confusion about what death actually is, but it's a person.
yeah, and we were talking too about the not the partners. What was yeah, I guess it was the Miller, where it's kind of important if there's magic in this. Because if you've got this wandering old man who can magically turn you into the old man so that he can die, if you trade him his youth, and then it kind of goes on around and around like this. I mean that's pretty fascinating. I mean, there's a metaphysic going on there. I mean, there's a devil to make a bargain with, or an angel to make a bargain with, if you will, or if he, is a gateway to death. Like he sends these kids apparently to their death because he tells them where. And does he say that it's death at the tree, or that there's like a treasure at the tree, and they, it ends up being death? I forget about that.
He says that it's death, and then they go and they see. He says, "Oh, you can find death," and they find it, and it represents greed, and then
Yeah, so I mean that's what does make me think that there is a magical read, because how can this old man first of all know where a bunch of treasure is, just as like a thing, and without it being some kind of Bugs Bunny trickster situation where he's setting you up. It's an odd, like, usually people don't know where a bunch of riches are, and then to also then know that that's going to lead to your downfall. That's far-reaching, not omni, but like wide awareness, not omniscience, but pretty something. He's in on something. So it has to be taken with a certain kind of magic, for really lack of a better word here, because something like paganism, or it's like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. There's stuff going on there, but it's not exactly anyway.
Yeah,
I wanted to read this. Right. I wanted to read this last part of the prologue. He says, "Now, gentlemen, I've come to my conclusion. I understand you want me to tell a tale, and now I've had a jug of cornbread ale. By God, I think I'm ready to tell you things that should, in reason's name, be much to your liking. Despite the fact that I'm an immoral fellow, I can tell a moral tale, and what I'll tell you is one I like to preach when I smell good profit. So hold your tongues, here my tale begins."
Yeah, that's great. Because that kind of tells you that, like, the reason this is any good at all is because it's of value to him as a grift. This is part of what he uses to do the dirty work or whatever, but it's a clean tool. This is mixing metaphors, but it makes sense here that this is, something that this is a device for him. And the strength of the device actually is opposite of what his characteristics is, which is, deceptive or whatever. It's a good story. You know what I mean? It's like using your kid to rob somebody or something. You know what I mean? Like, because the kid's cute, you'll let him into your house.
And I mean, would you say that it's fair? That's probably, I'm thinking I would be like, well, fuck you. If you try to sell me a relic after you told me all your shtick and, you would think, I would think you're trying to say that I'm an idiot if you try to sell me a relic after telling me this whole spiel. So you think that is why the host is so pissed and has such a negative reaction to the do you want a relic?
Yeah, and I think it's also combined with the fact that the partner says with some amount of seriousness, I think, that host, you should begin because you're the most enveloped in sin. Oh. Like he's like, you're all a bunch of fucking sinners, right? Like, so you better fucking buy my.
And you're the worst of them all. Okay.
Yeah, and you're Catholic, right? So why don't you fucking buy my relic? I think that's what he's implying there, and that's why it's so incredibly offensive.
Yeah, and one more thing. I think we might be able to separate out the historical partner role with this particular partner. Again, I know nothing about the culture of the church at the time, but if we take it that there was there was partnering, and this guy is a particular, embodiment of that, and a comment on it too by being the way he is, which is, corrupt. We would presume that a good partner, the acting in some kind of charitable moral faith, wouldn't cheat a widow, right? But this one does. And so we get that. The thing is,
yeah, sorry.
Oh no, that's all. And just so that we can kind of pair out Chaucer's voice with because a lot of the times when we read these things, what we get is a download of the culture, and then there's somewhere in there's an authoritative voice, so we can be put off that these guys sat down to tea for so long, but that's not really interesting because that's convention, just not ours. And we have to
yeah.
Your point about what would a good partner look like is interesting because you can easily imagine that the original idea was something like, well, we need to build these hospitals and churches and all this kind of crap. And how are we going to go about doing that? Well, if you gave money to build these good things that people need, then that would be a good thing to do. And, according to the basic tenets of our philosophy is that the way you get into heaven is you go and you do good things, right? It's like the corruption of the pardoning system is kind of so inherent to the logic of how you're supposed to get into heaven, right? Like in theory, you could just buy your way into heaven, right? And I guess in theory, somehow there's supposed to be some sort of proper intent that goes along with it.
Yeah, it's like a reverse transubstantiation.
Right.
your bucks are actually, a sign of good material spirituality or whatever.
But the thing is that, the picture of humanity that's being painted here, it's like, how could anyone ever possibly have the proper intent? Because people really, it seems fairly rarely have the proper intent. I should note that later on, there's a tale told by a parson who is kind of depicted as an honest to God Christian, but, ironically, he doesn't tell it as a poem. The parson doesn't tell it as a poem, and it doesn't even really tell a tale. He just gives a sermon on the 7 deadly sins, and he almost stands as a refutation to the entire book. Then it's followed by what's called Chaucer's retraction, where he basically says something along the lines of boy, I'm about to die. I really regret writing all these sinful stories. Some of them are okay. Yeah, no, that's basically what he says. It ends with Chaucer's retraction, but what he says is, I'll read the translation.
Wait, this is Chaucer? Not a character?
Remember, Chaucer is a character in the Canterbury Tales, so I'm assuming, Chaucer, the retraction is by Chaucer, the character, or is it by Chaucer, the author, right? Like, that's
Well,
kind of an
aren't we
ambiguity
under the
right
assumption
there.
that he's doing some kind of veil dance to
Yeah.
protect, his voice from, getting, the knife point of the church?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And he says this, I mean, okay, but he says this, and if there be anything that displeases, i.e. my readers, I beg them also to impute it to the fault of my want of ability and not to my will, who would very gladly have said better if I had the power. So he's basically again saying like, oh, guys, don't blame me. I'm just dumb Chaucer. Then he says, for our book, i.e. the Bible, says all that is written for our doctrine, i.e. our instruction. And that is my intention. Wherefore I beseech you meekly for the mercy of God to pray for me, that Christ have mercy on me and forgive me my sins, and especially for my translations, and writings of worldly vanities, which I revoke in my retraction. And then he lists out all his books. When he lists the tales of Canterbury, he qualifies that by saying at least those that would tend towards sin. So, like, apparently some of the tales in Canterbury Tales tend towards sin. Some of them don't. He doesn't explain which ones, would lead to sin and which don't. Oh, and then he says, among the things he lists is many a song and many a lecherous lay. Christ forgive me. I mean, people often take this as just being serious, which I think is nuts, considering that he just spent the whole book playing a metafictional game.
Yeah, really.
But it's just fascinating. And I think it's kind of Chaucer. I mean, I think Chaucer does like the parson. I know you didn't read the parson tale, but just take it at my word that, like, the parson really does seem to be what a Christian is supposed to be. And I think the Chaucer, in a way, does like the parson, but he knows that, like, the world isn't that simple and human nature isn't that simple, which is why I don't think his retraction is completely serious. Like, he could have just burnt all his manuscripts of Canterbury Tales, right? Like,
Yeah.
it seems a little nuts to have. Anyway.
Yeah, no, he wanted to keep face for the church.
Yeah.
Probably. That's what.
Yeah, right, which is definitely a part of it, right?
Yeah. I can see that at that time, sure. Absolutely. But the thing I wanted to say was that bottom line, the partner is honest, right? He's being honest.
He's bad.
And that's
being honest.
But
yeah.
he's being honest about being bad, but he's being honest. And that is one of the great virtues of religion and of the church. And it's valued intensely. In fact, one of the secondary literature things I saw said something like, the partner is not completely evil. He's simply another damaged being in a defective body, attempting to exist in harmony.
That's true. I think
So in many ways, he is exhibiting what the church wants you to exhibit, and be the honest person that you are.
It seems like in a lot of ways, it's got to just be, the way in which the church, I don't know anything about what the church was like during this time, but the way that the Catholic Church is now, and pardon me for any Catholics out there who disagree, but it's like they take money from people, and all of this money goes toward the church. And it seems like such a greedy thing where you have all these, people living with such opulence and such abundance. Meanwhile, they're taking from these people in the name of God, and how, like, despicable that is. I mean, if it was like that at that time, then it seems like it should be some sort of a commentary on how awful that is, right? Like, that's sort of his idea. And then maybe by telling this tale, it's like, well, can you do that? Can you be this awful human and still serve God, I guess, serve the purpose of getting God's word, or whatever you want to call it.
The thing I'm getting is that, yeah, in a way, in a sick way, yeah, because he's being honest about see, what just kills me in many ways is the deception. That's really what we have in the church now and then, okay? The deception of putting themselves forward as these perfect, great, kind human beings, as priests and popes and whatnot, and then turning around and, screwing little boys and abusing kids and abusing, you know what I'm saying? I mean, the thing that appeals to me about the partner again is that, okay, yeah, I'm an asshole, but I'm telling you how I'm an asshole. I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you, I'm being honest. And to me, that rises way above the church. I mean, you know, he is far greater and far better, in my opinion, than the church.
And kind of if we knew that, like maybe we would all respond like the host did. You know, maybe if we all knew and understood that the people who are asking for our money and taking it and using it for these things and are just greedy and whatever, perhaps we wouldn't be so willing to buy into a lot of their crap, and we would respond very similarly to their, you know, some of the things that they do, instead of placing them on this pedestal of, you know, holier than thou.
Yeah, well, I'd say, yeah, it's that idea that like the Pope is infallible, right? Like it above what a human being is. And it's just such amazing bullshit. It's shocking.
So do we just underscore the point of the Canterbury Tales?
Repeat that back for us, if you don't mind.
Oh, which would be wake up, don't believe the nonsense. It's nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had time to read all of them, because then maybe like a larger, you know, theme would occur. But it just seems like the few that I've read, it's like if you could sum up the three that we read, it would be like, let's take all of what we believe to be true and the norm about certain aspects of society and just say it's bullshit. You know, it's bullshit that women should be subservient to men. It's bullshit that, you know, like in the Miller's Tale, that people who are of a lower rank are somehow less, or the people that have a higher rank are somehow more, you know, more godly, less human, more infallible, or less infallible, you know, because he kisses the ass of the guy and all of that. And then same thing with the church, you know, and everyone else is mere human, and maybe that's not true.
Well, and also for the I think the Partner's Tale, you've got these three maybe virtuous boys that are going to avenge the death of a friend who end up murdering each other, right?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting twist.
But they don't seem. Do they seem virtuous? They seem like,
you know, probably. I mean, this is a lot. Mostly, I mean, with some kind of like abstract intention here. You know, I'm not like underwriting what they're, but they do seem to be like. Now, again, I think you're right. These are just young men who are like just terrible probably and are just murderous. But they did find, you know, one thing to do with it, which seems like posse up and take on a bad guy. So you can read that as, you know, having at least a good intention before they, you know, fall over each other to get a bunch of gold.
Yeah.
I mean, what the quote is that they say death shall be dead, which echoes phrase in the Bible. I mean, there are so many phrases in the Bible that have kind of similar rhetoric of, you know, we're overcoming death. And it really does seem like their impulse to kill death, is something akin to the religious impulse, as strange as that sounds.
Yeah, like I think death is a stand-in here for all of the sin, right? Like basically all of the gluttony and all those 7 deadly sins, that results in death. So if you're trying to get rid of death, doesn't it seem like, or am I just really twisting it, that you're trying to make that not be the case? Like you don't want the 7 deadly sins to be death because you want to do those things.
Yeah, I mean, the way that the 7 deadly sins are all bound up with basic biological drives. I mean, there's a weird way, if the 7 deadly sins are death, then
it's like
life is death.
Yeah, it's like you take the one thing and you go too far with it. You know, like you need food, and so now that becomes gluttony. And
yeah, I see that. I just want to put like maybe a finer point on this, which is if you take this to be the reading, then when you have the old man asking for you to trade with him so that he may die, what you get is like an eternal life in the old man. And if you were to forget about your own, you know, using of that matter as in youth, and, you know, like, drinking at the bar and like trying to have like a big time. If you could just bypass all that willfully and live without, I mean, in the state of an, like the kind of archetypal state of an old man, which is to say, on the brink of just pure consciousness. I mean, they're not like really, exuberant, but they do have like a mind, kind of like a wizard figure. If you could, that would be living, forever there. But you would be with no material kind of, pursuit, almost a monastic, hermetic, nirvana state. But
Yeah,
that would be
it's
what you
interesting.
get.
It's interesting that you mentioned Nirvana. This story originates with Buddhists, supposedly. I mean, it originated as a Buddhist story
Does seem
like
very
1,000 years earlier, and
Yeah.
it made its way over through, I think, Arabian Nights. It made it to England, somehow or other. It's, there are versions in Africa. Essentially, Treasure of Sierra Madre is modeled after.
yeah.
This is great. I'm so
there's a
glad to
million
hear
things
this.
modeled after Treasure of Sierra Madre. So this is like a story that is reached into every single corner of the world. And this is just like part of the river. It's like an Amazon, right?
That's so
Yeah.
great because this is such a great story. And that makes sense. It's like whenever things just get co-opted, don't know the source any longer, but still it like reflects the brilliance. It's a really good story.
One little thing. You had mentioned when you said that the old man has to make a trade with the young man. It made me think for a second, like, okay, let's compare and contrast with Christ. And, the idea of Christ was that he was like giving, right? It wasn't a trade. It's not, which is actually like an interesting thought. Because so often in the preaching, it's like, well, Christ gave you this. Why won't you give this thing back?
But did he? I mean, I don't know so much if it's definitely a gift or it was a trade. It was like,
yeah.
you don't get to have whatever Christ offered unless you do, take up your cross and follow him kind of thing. Like, it's pretty clear it's a trade.
Well, and if you take the
Yeah.
story, then like what it would be is that like, well, if you want to end death and live forever, then here's your form. You get to be this a wandering old man, like or wandering. And again, I want to get away from like the physicality of it because I think there's something again archetypal about like age and youth going on. But like if you move over to that, then you'd be trading out. You would be giving up your worldly desires by losing your youth and becoming a sage. And then the only way to I mean, I don't know what this means for the sage character in order to get to the afterlife. What is the function of finding someone to take your place? Is it just I wonder about this. But now knowing that it goes deeper and richer, I'll turn it over in different ways because if it was, let's say, a new story or a relatively newer story, there could be more supernaturalism implied than I think. This is more mythic, less than supernatural or specifically Christian. So it bears more thinking.
Well, one interesting thing is, that I'm thinking is that he says, who would trade his youth for my age. And he says he can't find anybody that will do that willingly. So I have to say, as old as I am, for as long as God is pleased to keep me a man, and death is unwilling to take my life. But when I think of that phrase, trading the youth for age, it's kind of when you think, well, it makes me think of, would you rather be, 20 or 40? Like, would you rather have the youth and the looks and the energy and the promise and the whatever that you have in your 20s, or are you kind of glad to be out of that and have the wisdom of your age?
That's true, but like he's like at this point he's like infinitely old. I mean, what I keep on thinking about is when the universe is going to be composed entirely of like black holes and loose photons,
No, I don't make that connection.
Okay.
Say that again.
Like, I imagine him as being like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old at this point.
Yeah,
and he's in a body that can't die.
Well, so let's take like a counterfact or something like that, where he does find someone, let's say, to trade their youth for his age. Like metaphysically, what would that look like? What would be the significance of that? This is rhetorical.
I mean, what would he really get? He would just get old again.
Well, the
right?
trader
Like,
would,
like
but that would be a certain kind of like human process. Like, so what we have is this story. It looks like individuals going on, but if we take this as like a human sketch or tale, then if you traded it, then that would be like a completed thing, and then it would happen again and again and again, which would make it timeless and also like apply to every human and that kind of a thing.
And why does he need to be the one to tell us where death is? Like, you have to get to the point where these people find a treasure, right? Like, that's how the story plot moves forward. So they put in this character. I mean, I would think that's the plot, but what is the purpose? What is the purpose of this person? Yeah, sharing like where death is, and why does he need to be so old and have escaped death? Like, what's that about?
I think he's the ultimate symbol of like this worldliness. Like, I think that,
or rather, I mean, that's a aspect of it. I see where you're going with that. And again, I use archetype like carefully to talk about old man and death, but like he represents a certain kind of, I think that it's actually not like worldliness as much as like the kids and the treasure is worldliness, but this other kind of, a conscious life. These eyes, what these eyes have seen kind of a thing. And so it's an aspect of life where the boys and the treasure and like the adventure are a different kind of a.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Or like you could see it as, I've already gone down that path. I'm old. I've seen it all. This is not the way to happiness. This is not the way to a good life. This is not the way to all of those things. Wisdom, whatever, blah, blah, blah. You want to find death. It's over there. It's over there with the treasures, with the worldly. So I think, yeah.
It's like, if you want to die, go and live a life.
Yeah, go and pursue like hedonism. Go and pursue your most basic. That's not where.
What's interesting is that it's
100%.
knowing. I said what's interesting about it is that it's knowing. Like he knows what the treasure will manifest in these three, and that will be death, and he's able to call it death to them. You know what I mean? And like they're surprised that it's treasure, apparently. So that kind of understanding, that's a little bit mysterious too. So I don't know what to make of that exactly. That, where does this prophecy or ability or magical seeming knowledge come from that there's a bunch of treasure under a tree that'll end?
I mean, in a way, it's true. Like that is sort of a message in the Bible, but it's also, like he said, I pull this tale out when I feel like, there's a lot of money to be had. So he's like, this is a way to get people to loosen their pockets. People aren't going to be so attached to their money if they hear this long sermon about this person the people who go after money, and obviously it doesn't end well. So I think, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just wondering why this person needs to be so just like disgusting though.
Wait, the old man is the one that's disgusting here?
Doesn't it feel like he's sort of like, ugh?
No, I think he's a hero.
No, I mean, like, no, like the way he looks, like, the way he looks. Don't they say, like, he's all wrapped in banners or what? Where is that part?
Lo, how I vanish, flesh, blood, and skin. That line. I can't get over that line.
Yeah. So he's isn't he basically, shriveled up and kind of.
Yeah, but he's alive, baby. He's been around for, you know what I mean? Like he's. That's the thing. That's the rejection. That's what life without all that would look like. Like root consciousness, basically. That's as close to you get. I think that's what's symbolized in that kind of like age is you have to infer a different kind of the wealth of a consciousness at that point. It's not going to be like a baby, would represent you. There's just happening going on. It's not really, there's not a lot there.
Well, and these people, these sort of righteous youth, though, they speak to him nastily, too. And he's like, you shouldn't speak to me that way.
Well, yeah, because they don't know anything. They disdain life, by doing that, or whatever, or spit in the eye of Jesus, who's a beggar or whatever. It's that same kind of not recognizing, the commonality of humanity, and so in that way, these kids, by the time they get to the treasure, we're like, I hope they fucking kill each other, because like
so is this like, the story where, what was that story with Morgan Freeman and Jim Carrey where he's God and like this God character shows up and he looks like a beggar and he looks terrible and nobody pays any attention to him, but he's like got the answers. Is that kind of what he's doing here?
Yeah, well, except for that,
basically spit in the face of wisdom because it doesn't look good.
I mean, I think that, yeah, with the difference being that there's not a godhead in this old man. It seems this old man still needs a God to release him, and the only way that God will come forth is the completion of this wager, or this bet, or not a bet, but this condition. He has to find somebody to move on, and that's not in his control,
Sacrifice.
So he's not all powerful in that way.
Okay, well, I think we've gone way past our time.
Yeah. Let's acknowledge that we'll never understand it. And, do you want to do last lines?
That's life.
Or shall we?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, I don't either, but if you got them, burn them if you got them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if I have any. Do you have them? What do you have?
No, I don't. Anyway, we did our last lines last time. I would just be repeating things I read earlier. All right. So in any event,
sacrilege to take last lines from like a translated version to me.
Good point.